change. Madagascar has decided to follow Burkina Faso, and now the army is taking over. For weeks...
The Ibrahim Traore effect just hit East Africa. Yeah, you heard that right. Another French puppet has fallen, but this time it's not in the Sahel, it's in Madagascar, an island that...
Images are emerging straight from Antananarivo. Armed soldiers blocked streets and interrupted broadcasts. The army of Madagascar has just declared that it has taken power. But what no one expected was what came next. Reports claim that Captain Ibrahim Traore, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, has just arrived in the country to support the military coup. But why? What would drive one of Africa's most symbolic anti-colonial leaders to involve himself in a power shift beyond his borders? To understand how we got here, we need to go back in time, deep into the geopolitical chessboard that's been shaping Africa since Traore's rise in 2022. That year, the young Burkinabe captain overthrew a government backed by foreign interests, declaring the end of political and economic dependency imposed by Washington, the European Union, and the former colonial power, France. Since then, he has become the face of a new generation of African leaders rejecting Western domination and pushing for continental unity. But why Madagascar, an island strategically located in the Indian Ocean, would suddenly become the stage for this new and silent confrontation? According to the BBC report published on October 13th, as it happened, Madagascar military says it has seized power. The country's armed forces announced they had taken control, citing political and economic irregularities that weakened the civilian government. At the same time, videos started circulating online showing crowds chanting Ibrahim Traore's name. In one clip shared on Facebook, the caption reads, "Madagascar follows Captain Ibrahim Traore. Africa is rising." Was it just a symbolic show of support? Or did Traore actually play a direct role in the operation? Who invited Traore to Madagascar? Did he act as a military advisor, a mediator, or an ideological spark for the local army? And more importantly, why Madagascar, a country rich in natural resources and a key maritime route between Africa, the Middle East, and Asia? Could this be the first visible sign of an expanding African military alliance that began in the Sahel? But to uncover the real reason behind Traore's alleged presence in Madagascar and what it truly means for Africa's future, we need to go back even further, because this story doesn't begin with the coup itself. It begins with a long-term plan, a plan that challenges the West and threatens to reshape the entire balance of power across the continent. Before we can understand why Traore's name echoes through the streets of Madagascar, we need to uncover what was happening beneath the surface. According to multiple reports from African and international media, tensions inside Madagascar's military had been growing for months. Corruption, rising food prices, and the sense that foreign powers, particularly France, still maintained invisible control over the country's key sectors, created a silent storm within the army's ranks. Soldiers began to question, who really rules Madagascar, its elected government, or the foreign interests behind it? It's not a coincidence that this unrest erupted right after a wave of political awakenings across Africa's Sahel region. Since Traore took power in Burkina Faso, a chain reaction has spread. Mali, Niger, and even parts of Chad began shifting away from Western influence and forming a new bloc of independent leadership. Could Madagascar be the next piece on this chessboard? According to the same BBC live coverage, the military's declaration was swift, coordinated, and precise, far too organized for a spontaneous mutiny. This has led many analysts to suspect that external ideological influence might have played a role. Not necessarily foreign troops, but a new idea, an African idea. A belief that Africa must reclaim its sovereignty, not through elections manipulated by outsiders, but through decisive internal action. And here lies the intriguing part. Ibrahim Traore has never publicly commented on Madagascar, yet his image, his speeches, and his symbolism have become a kind of revolutionary currency across the continent. Videos posted on TikTok and Facebook during the coup showed crowds shouting, "Africa is rising," a slogan directly associated with Traore's rhetoric in Ouagadougou. If he didn't physically set foot in Madagascar, why do people believe he did? Could it be that his presence is now larger than the man himself, a symbol that travels faster than truth? But the deeper question is, who benefits from this narrative? Is someone amplifying the idea of Traore's arrival to send a message, to warn, or perhaps to provoke the West? After all, Madagascar's location is not just symbolic. It sits along one of the most critical maritime routes linking Africa to Asia, an area closely monitored by Washington and Paris. If a pro-independence government were to rise there, it could completely change the balance of power in the Indian Ocean. And so the mystery deepens. Was this a spontaneous act of rebellion, or a carefully planned step in a much larger continental strategy? To understand why Madagascar has suddenly become so important, we need to look at what lies beneath its soil and beyond its shores. This is not just a tropical island. It's a gateway, a massive piece of land sitting at the crossroads of Africa's east coast, the Middle East, and Asia. Whoever controls Madagascar controls one of the key maritime routes through which billions of dollars in goods, oil, and minerals pass every year. That's why, for decades, the island has been quietly courted by the same powers that once dominated Africa: France, the United States, and members of the European Union. According to an investigative report by the Africa Report, French companies still maintain deep roots in Madagascar's mining and energy sectors, despite the country's independence in 1960. Nickel, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, resources essential for Western technology and defense industries, are extracted here and exported under contracts that heavily favor European corporations. This dependence has long been criticized by local activists who say Madagascar's economy is still colonial in disguise. So when the military suddenly took power, the question wasn't just about politics. It was about breaking free from decades of silent economic servitude. And this is where Ibrahim Traore's influence becomes impossible to ignore. Since his rise in Burkina Faso, Traore has openly accused Western powers of exploiting Africa's natural wealth while keeping the continent dependent on foreign aid. His message, that Africa must control its own resources, has spread like wildfire. The fact that soldiers in Madagascar echoed his name during the takeover is not coincidence. It's a reflection of an idea spreading across the continent: Africa, united, resource-rich, and self-governed. But that idea terrifies the West, according to analysts quoted in The Economist. Washington and Paris have been increasingly concerned about the rise of nationalist military regimes across Africa, especially those showing ties to Moscow and Beijing. Both powers have offered alternative alliances, ones that reject Western conditionality and embrace sovereignty. Could Madagascar now be the next frontier in this silent East-West confrontation? The timing is suspicious. Just weeks before the coup, Western diplomats had intensified talks with Madagascar's government over new trade and security deals. Then suddenly, the military struck. Was it a reaction to external pressure, or the result of an internal movement inspired by the same anti-imperialist wave that swept through the Sahel? And here comes the haunting question. If Traore's vision can spread without him setting foot on the island, what happens when this idea reaches other coastal nations? Could this be the beginning of a continental realignment, one that the old powers can no longer contain? Behind closed doors, the reaction in Western capitals was immediate. According to leaked diplomatic memos cited by Reuters Africa, both Washington and Paris held emergency consultations within 24 hours of the military takeover in Madagascar. Intelligence assessments reportedly warned of a potential domino effect. The possibility that the ideological wave ignited by Ibrahim Traore could spread from the Sahel to coastal and island nations, effectively redrawing the political map of Africa. For the West, this is not just about leadership changes, it's about losing strategic control. Madagascar's location makes it a vital observation point for maritime routes and military logistics in the Indian Ocean. A pro-sovereignty government there, friendly to African or Eurasian powers, could alter naval balance and resource access in ways that directly challenge Western dominance. One analyst quoted by Le Monde Afrique described it bluntly. If Madagascar falls under the influence of this new African bloc, the West loses its last maritime safeguard on the eastern flank of Africa. But there's something deeper here, a fear that cannot be easily quantified. Traore represents something that no intelligence agency can contain, the psychological awakening of a continent. Across social media platforms, millions of Africans began sharing messages of unity under hashtags like Africa is Rising and Stand with Traore. Even in countries not directly involved in any political change, youth movements started demanding a new path, one free from what they call neo-colonial manipulation. And so, the West finds itself in an impossible dilemma. If it condemns the coups, it appears hypocritical after decades of supporting leaders who served foreign interests. But if it stays silent, it risks legitimizing this growing movement of defiance. According to a report by Al Jazeera Africa, Western diplomats are now quietly exploring new approaches to re-engage African nations without appearing as colonial overseers. The problem: the trust is already broken. Meanwhile, Russia and China have stayed remarkably silent, at least publicly. Yet analysts believe their influence is growing in the background. Trade deals, military training, and infrastructure investments are quietly linking African capitals into a web of partnerships that no longer depend on Western approval. Could Madagascar be the next node in this expanding network? An island pivot that connects Africa's internal rebellion with external support from Eurasian powers. If so, then this coup is more than a local event. It's a signal, a declaration that Africa's geopolitical awakening has reached the ocean. And the real question now is, how far will it spread, and who will dare to stop it? While Western powers scrambled to interpret the meaning of Madagascar's sudden coup, the reaction inside Africa told a very different story. Across the continent, from Bamako to Addis Ababa, whispers began spreading through political and military circles. According to Africa Intelligence, several senior officers from neighboring nations privately praised the move, calling it a necessary correction against foreign manipulation. In public, however, the African Union remained cautious, urging constitutional order, while carefully avoiding any direct condemnation of the soldiers in power. But behind that diplomatic restraint lies a truth few are willing to admit. The balance of power inside Africa is shifting, from politicians loyal to Western capitals to nationalist officers who claim to act in the name of sovereignty. The message that Ibrahim Traore ignited in Burkina Faso is now echoing across the continent like a quiet drumbeat: unity, dignity, control over natural wealth. Countries once isolated by geography or language are now connected by a shared frustration. Decades of dependency masked as partnership. According to a June Afrique editorial, the African military class is no longer fighting for foreign flags. It is fighting for ownership of its future. This change in mindset is what terrifies old alliances. And yet, this movement isn't coordinated through formal institutions or official treaties. It spreads through words, symbols, and shared anger. Traore's speeches circulate online as underground manifestos. His photo appears next to maps of a united Africa, drawn without colonial borders. The emotional power of this imagery has transformed him from a national figure into a continental archetype, the soldier who dared to defy. Even if he never ordered a single action outside Burkina Faso, his ideology has become an invisible command. Madagascar, then, is not an isolated event. It's part of a silent chain reaction. From the mineral fields of Niger to the coastal routes of Mozambique, soldiers, youth movements and reformists are quietly asking the same question. If others broke free, why can't we? And this is where the fear turns into possibility. If these scattered uprisings ever connect, if they ever find common ground, Africa could experience the largest internal realignment since decolonization. But there's another layer, one far more complex. Regional alliances like ECOWAS and the African Union now face a crisis of identity. They were created under Western diplomatic influence, but their members are now split between two visions, one that preserves international legitimacy and one that demands total sovereignty, no matter the cost. Which side will prevail? For now, the streets of Antananarivo are calm. The world's media has shifted its focus, and diplomats are pretending that order has returned. But beneath that silence, a new Africa is forming, one that no longer asks for permission to rise. While the world debates whether Ibrahim Traore truly set foot in Madagascar, something far more consequential is unfolding behind closed doors. A wave of secret diplomacy linking Africa's most defiant leaders into what some analysts are calling the new non-aligned movement. According to confidential briefings obtained by Reuters Africa, delegations from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and now representatives connected to Madagascar's Transitional Council have quietly held talks in Addis Ababa and Moscow over the past 3 months. The topic: building a framework for collective sovereignty, a term that signals the rebirth of an Africa free from both Western dependence and unilateral domination. To understand how serious this is, we must look at the pattern. After Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formed the Alliance of Sahel States earlier this year, they pledged to defend one another militarily and economically against outside pressure, including sanctions from the African Union and the European Union. That was the first open declaration of independence from Western-aligned structures. Now, sources cited by the Africa Report suggest that the same model is being discussed for coastal and island nations, beginning with Madagascar and Mozambique. But this time, the stakes are global. China's foreign ministry has already expanded its Belt and Road cooperation talks to include new African defense and energy corridors, while Moscow is pushing for a Pan-African Security Council, a proposal that would coordinate intelligence and logistics across the continent without Western oversight. If these plans succeed, Africa could soon host a fully autonomous bloc capable of negotiating directly with the world's superpowers, not as clients, but as equals. And yet the methods remain deliberately quiet. There are no flashy summits, no public announcements. Instead, agreements are being sealed through state visits, trade delegations, and bilateral memorandums hidden under the guise of infrastructure or cultural cooperation. As Le Monde Afrique recently reported, Africa is no longer asking for permission, it is learning to move in silence. For Western governments, this new silence is terrifying. Intelligence agencies have begun to track not just troop movements, but narratives tracing how social media, documentaries, and even local radio broadcasts are fueling a new continental identity that transcends borders. The voice of Traore, his speeches, his defiance, has become a soundtrack for a political awakening. He has turned into what one analyst called a catalyst of continental consciousness. And that brings us to the deeper question. Is this the birth of a multipolar Africa, or the beginning of a global ideological war fought through influence, not weapons? Because if these quiet alliances harden into a political structure, the world order as we know it, shaped for decades by Washington, Paris, and Brussels, could face its most serious challenge since the Cold War. The silence didn't last long. As the African movement for sovereignty grew louder, the Western world began to move, not with armies, but with narratives. According to an investigation by The Intercept Africa, intelligence agencies from Washington and Paris launched coordinated media campaigns shortly after the Madagascar coup, designed to reframe Africa's new military movements as destabilizing threats. Carefully worded statements appeared in Western outlets, describing leaders like Ibrahim Traore as radical populists or Russian-backed strongmen. Yet none of these reports provided evidence of direct interference, only speculation. The goal wasn't to prove, but to plant doubt. This strategy mirrors Cold War information tactics: discredit, isolate, then influence. Sources cited by Le Monde Diplomatique confirm that Western embassies in several African capitals have quietly reactivated old media partnerships, funding fact-checking initiatives and civil society programs aimed at countering what they call anti-Western sentiment. But the irony is clear. In trying to control the narrative, they have only made it more visible. Every attempt to silence or discredit Traore and his allies has backfired, reinforcing the belief among millions of Africans that Western powers still see the continent not as a partner, but as a territory to be managed. Meanwhile, Africa's digital battlefield has shifted. TikTok, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter, have become the new frontlines of geopolitical influence. Short clips showing Traore's speeches, footage of protests in Mali, or celebrations in Madagascar spread faster than any official statement. And behind those screens, algorithms amplify what traditional diplomacy cannot stop: emotion, pride, defiance, hope. Western strategists now face a problem that can't be solved with sanctions or military bases: the loss of narrative control. The United States has tried to rebuild diplomatic influence through new economic frameworks like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure, meant to rival China's Belt and Road. France, on the other hand, is struggling with a full-blown crisis of credibility in its former colonies. Each new withdrawal of French troops from African soil symbolizes not just a military defeat, but a psychological one: the collapse of an empire's narrative. And yet, instead of ending, the confrontation has evolved. Analysts quoted in Foreign Policy warn that the West may soon use financial and cyber measures to weaken governments aligned with this new African bloc, by pressuring banks, cutting aid, or even freezing assets. If that happens, Africa's struggle for sovereignty could turn from political awakening into economic warfare. The question now is, can Africa maintain its independence under such pressure? Or will this new wave of unity collapse under the same invisible systems that once colonized it, not through armies, but through money, algorithms, and propaganda? Because what started in Burkina Faso with Ibrahim Traore's defiance, what echoed through Madagascar's coup, and what now spreads across borders, has become something the world has never seen before: a digital revolution of consciousness. And that, perhaps, is the West's greatest fear.